Welcome to the Scale Forward podcast. Today, I'm excited to introduce Nate Roybal, who is the Director of Partnerships and GTM Strategist over at Synchry. Since launching in 2018, they've processed over 100 billion transactions and have helped transform data operations for more than 6,000 users. Nate, are you able to walk me through your journey with Synchry, how you got started, what led you to leave, or if you're still partnered with your first startup, and your journey towards Director of Partnerships?
Yeah. So, it almost feels like I just start all the way at the beginning, Grant, for this kind of conversation.
Please.
So my dad was in startups, right? My dad was actually, in the 30s, 32 actually at Apple, right? And so my whole life,
Wow.
I wanted to do startups, right? I messed around for a long time in my 20s. Finally graduated college right around 30. Moved into the startup game pretty much immediately, and went over to a company called Mercado, which was a data integration company, right? Moving data around, building workflows, right? Pretty cutting edge, right? It wasn't like I was joining like a Marketo or a Salesforce where it's like an established market. And it was hard. It was Series A. I was the second SDR, had kind of built that function from zero. And doing sales previously, it was also kind of like a step down, but that was fine. Over the course of the time there, I learned the tool, ended up becoming a partnership leader, and eventually kind of followed my old partnership leader. She was my director. Now she's my VP, from Mercado to Synchry, right? Because one, Mercado got a little bit too big for where I wanted to be in terms of I didn't feel like I was making an impact anymore. It was about 1,000 people versus when I joined it was 50. We joined Synchry, and we're a much smaller team where I can kind of make an impact and wear a lot of hats, which is both good and bad, I think, in a lot of ways.
So something that really stood out to me is I want to keep this about you, but I need to touch on number 32 at Apple. How do you think that experience shaped who you are today, what you learned, and how much of an impact do you think it had in molding you to doing what you do?
I think it had, extreme impact in multiple ways. I think one of the major ways was, just hearing the stories, and the stories coming out of like an early startup like Apple are the most classic you hear. Star Wars comes out, they rent out 3 movie theaters and have champagne and the whole, right? My dad's telling me these stories about going there, opening Apple France and all this stuff that he did, right? My whole childhood I hear that. I'm like, that sounds like fun. That sounds like Roybal, right? And so, that was a driver for me. But, he was also, he learned to market at Apple. So he had kind of done some marketing before, but he landed at Apple as their first marketer. And he was the first person that had to talk to customers. He had engineering background, but he ended up having to talk to customers, right? So he learned how to market, and Apple is known to be really good at marketing. He learned really good, and he worked directly for Steve and all this stuff, right? And so my whole young life, I got to learn from probably one of the best marketers I've ever met, and that I've still ever met. And that's been really, really good at helping me be both customer centric, really, really care about some of the things I'm doing, and really understand some of these things in the depth that I often don't see other people do in terms of, just customer centricity and what needs to be done. So for people like this.
Yeah, I don't doubt. You also mentioned coming across what was the individual? What was her name? You followed her across?
Oh, Mary Boo.
Mary. How did you know that Mary was the right person to follow or partner with, I guess?
I got so many good things to say about Mary. So Mary is like she is a woman in tech that has continually punched above her weight from the time that she's been landed in tech, right? And you can just see that, right? She's being a woman in tech is hard enough, right? And you can see that she has to fight for every bit of respect that she gets, but she has proven herself again and again, and she is so humble about the entire thing, right? And for me, I never like to toot my own horn, right? I think like when I was at Mercado, I came up with one of these sayings that they kind of used actually for the company going forward for a while. I don't know if they still do, but it's basically like what we want to imbibe is like extremely capable, but extremely humble about it, right? Like we can get it done, but I will never ever talk about how much I get done. Right? I don't care, right? I want to get it done because I want to solve things. I want to do cool things, and I want to build things. I want to help other people, right? But not because I want my name on a stage, right? And I think she imbibes that a lot too. And so she's always building up the people around her. And she always protected people around her. Right? So that's one of the things that's made me continually.
Shout out, Mary.
Yeah, shout out Mary.
Are you able to take us through sort of the journey on when you arrived at Synchry? What was the state of the startup? Share some numbers, and then eventually let's lead into what was day one for you. How did you get from the X to here? And are you able to share some insights on that? Give us just a lowdown.
Yeah, yeah. So I think the last couple of years have been an interesting SaaS time, but I joined right in middle pandemic 2021. I think late 2021 October. And joined as an account executive. I've been a partner manager, global partner manager, but wanted to get back into the sales side because I was a little bit tired of the politics, and jumped in and started selling. We actually started off, we pivoted quite a bit in terms of our messaging since then. But when we started to sell, we were actually very competitive to my previous company, right? And one of the reasons that brought me over beyond Mary, right, was we were solving the problem in a different way, in a way that I thought was fundamentally better for a lot of the things that I wanted to solve for. And so I became an evangelist pretty quick around that lens. I think there was a lot of learning in terms of what we could do in our actual approach. It's a very technical, complex solution that we offer, and it's really hard to sell. It's really hard to sell, and it's incredibly hard to sell when you have the typical technical founders that are enamored with the technical functionality of the product, but don't necessarily understand the business outcomes that people are going to be buying, right? And that's a standard starter problem. So I've been trying to solve that since I got here, essentially. But our ACV when I got here, I think it was something like 18, 20K. Right now, it's closer to 90 or 150K. Right. So it's a drastic difference in terms of what we're selling and as well as who we're selling to. That evolution has been interesting. So I'm now director of partnerships. I moved over maybe a year and a half ago or something like that. But I'm still doing a lot of sales. So, this stuff's hard to sell. We still have a hard time finding salespeople that can pick this up and sell it. And so regularly I get drawn back into sales cycles, and I still spend probably about half of my time selling.
Right. Yeah. There's a few things I want to dive. I mean, I get the product's very, very hard to I guess. What's the hard part about the product? Is it educating people about the product and what it can do you think, or is it's just kind of so new for, I don't want to say the normies, but for people who don't know?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a bit of both. It's like, so we did the thing that everybody chose not to do. Right? We're like, oh, let's build a category. That sounds like fun, right? And it's not
right.
Fun. It's awful. And I don't recommend it to anybody.
Okay.
You're continually trying to tell people what you are, and they're continually trying to slot you in, and you're continually telling them no. And no means that they just don't know anything. That's how they feel, right? Instead of saying, oh, cool, like we're kind of like that, but different, and it doesn't work very well. So instead of that, we decided to attach to a kind of a mainstream solution set and then call ourselves the next generation of that solution set, which has worked better, right? And we're actually getting the kind of conversations and the kind of deals that we want. But I think that there's that nuance to doing that whole thing.
What do you think worked really well to get you from the numbers at the start to those numbers that you mentioned earlier? What was the thing? What was the aha? That's what we got to do. What drove that?
I think it's a lot of like self discovery in a way, right? It's like, I think that every company, like every human, has to go through these moments where they kind of like have to take a look and be like, hey, what am I actually good at here? And what do I actually want to do with my life, right? Like, am I going to go and know everything under the sun that's in this one particular area? Am I going to be really, really good at one or two of these things and just go sell that? And what am I doing, right? And who am I doing that for? And I think we've continually had to ask that, right? Like when we were selling to RevOps and that kind of stuff, it was very different than selling to IT and data, which is what we do now, right? So now we're selling to a different market. We're targeting up market, and we're also talking about problems differently, right? So previously we used to talk about problems like you need to connect your Salesforce to NetSuite, and you maybe need to do some turn some quotes into some invoices and send those invoices off to clients so you get paid. Cool. That's automation. That's great value, right? But if you're talking to an enterprise company, it's like nothing's that simple. And also, that's not that compelling because everybody knows it's not that simple, right? So you almost end up sounding like you just don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So instead, right, if we can go forward and say, hey, like, we know that you have these sets of problems, and these sets of problems are probably leading to these sets of like impacts in your business, and you probably want to solve for at least one of these things. So let's go out and solve one of them, right?
Right.
And the problem with our solution is the same thing that is great about our solution, which is it's incredibly broad and can do a lot. And so we've kind of narrowed in on this, like, okay, cool. How do we partner with our enterprise champion and then help them narrow into a use case to be able to sell it internally effectively? Because it's like the hardest part of buying Synchry is not buying Synchry or even understanding the value. It's actually articulating the value to your internal enough to get the budget to buy something at 150K a year, right? Or 300K a year, right? Well, that's a big sell, right? And if you have to help a CTO or even a CEO understand data quality, data sync, and data integration, good luck telling them that's 300K, right? Like that's really hard. So champion building and then educating, I think, has been a big learning for us, as well as kind of like really honing in on what pieces are valuable and how do we get to those areas quickly and then drive at those.
How are you currently spending most of your time doing that? What platforms and what avenues are you going down with that? Are you just picking up the phones? Are you putting content out regularly?
Yeah, I think a mixed bag. I want to be putting out content regularly. I've been busy, and I think it's really hard to put content out regularly. I don't know, like, I think anybody who's tried to before, there's a year or two there that I did like almost every day, right? And then I go through fits and spurts one day, like, a couple times a week, maybe even every day for a couple weeks, and then it kind of falls off because I get busy, right? And I think, like, when you're building a brand, you have to kind of like pick and choose between, like, okay, am I talking about my own company? Am I talking about philosophy? Am I talking about news? Am I talking about a specific vertical or sales or marketing or whatever? Or like, right? And like, how do I mix and match those to actually make content that's relevant to the people that I want to talk to?
Exactly. Yeah.
That's really, really hard, right? That's just content. So I'm also doing outbound, right? I do outbound, I do calling. I'm trying to do a lot of AI integration into like the outbound function. So like, there's a lot of talk about like go-to-market engineering and stuff these days. I am not super bought in on it, but I'm not super bought in on the idea that like it's completely automatable. But I am super bought in on the idea that we can automate some of the terrible parts. Like, can I go find prospects automatically and do all the research I need to understand why this person wants to buy and write my own things, or like adjust things that I want to send, or call these people, right? That's where I think we're going to see the most traction, and that's where I'm seeing the most traction personally is very narrowly focusing in AI and research models to do that stuff at scale for me, and then let me go take the actions I want to take in that prospect.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's nobody really likes doing outbound ever. I don't think it's kind of cringe, right? But it needs to be done. And I keep hearing when I hear people like, oh, I'm going to automate outbound and we're going to use AI to outbound and it's going to help with personalization. I personally don't think it's quite there yet, having done outbound for years and trying to use AI and built my own AI agents trying to do that. And you probably have seen this yourself, and I'd like to get your thoughts on it. Have you dabbled in the AI voice agents?
No, I have not much. I've done a little bit with AI voice, for like voicemails or for like actual calling for you?
For like actually calling and receiving calls and booking follow-ups. And so it's like, imagine we have this meeting. Instead of me, well, an automated email goes out, you respond, and then if there's the phone number in there, then bang, you get a phone call, and it's Russell's AI's voice agent assistant. Now, it sounds great, but I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. There's a part of you like, if an AI robot called me, there's no way I'm convinced that this is either a thing or, are we there yet is what I'm wondering. I'm wondering your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like that makes sense if I am maybe showing interest and raising my hand and saying, I want to buy, and I'm potentially ready to self-serve on that. Do I ever want to self-serve on outbound? Has any SDR ever reached out to me and been like, hey, book yourself a meeting here because it's free, right? Like, no, we proved that for years. A free demo is zero value, right? And an AI offering is less value than a rep offering because they have no context, right? So I think the calling thing is crazy. I do see, like, we use Ample Market here. They've come out with some new AI features that are pretty interesting on their duo tool set. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's
Ample?
Ample Market. So it's
Right.
like competitor to Outreach and Apollo, those guys. We use it here. It's
Yep.
pretty effective. But I think there's a lot to be said about building your own GPTs and trying to like
Yeah.
automate some of the research too. I just recently rebuilt. I hope they build it, but I designed in Miro our inbound outbound funnel, right? Which is okay, cool. Can we tie outbound to driving eventual inbound and do things like web scraping and tie in GPT to do research and really just diminish the amount of tasks and places that a rep has to go to put together intelligent outreach at scale. Right. And I think for me as a rep, that's always been the challenge. It's like I can send good messages and I can get responses, but I can't go into every single company's LinkedIn, look up their 10K, look up the news, figure out what's relevant, and then like have an email bounce. I will kill myself. It's not
Yeah.
going to happen. If I can do that at scale, then it makes total sense, and we're seeing that kind of play out a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. And they're coming and I would, if that tool ever comes available and you find it before me, can you let me know? Because I would pay quite a lot of money for, for that tool that does all that.
Yeah.
You're mentioning so it comes through so getting scaling to that was coming through educating your ICPs, your hero, your champions. How did it evolve, or did it not evolve and you just discovered a better hero for yourselves? Because such a broad product, perhaps the messaging wasn't there, perhaps you're going after the wrong person, or did you notice a really big evolution of your ICP?
It's a great question. I think it's a bit of, again, I think it's a bit of both, right? It's like, yeah, we purposefully evolved our ICP, but it's also because I'd say, yeah, maybe it's more purposeful, right? Like we were selling to a lot more rev ops, marketing ops, head of like a business ops, like sales ops, like success ops, right?
Yeah.
To solve for a very specific domain like customer. Hey, I need all my customer data and I need it all together, right? I don't need it in templates. I need one customer view. Cool, we can solve for that. Right? Finance, I need one finance view. Like, hey, have they paid me, right? And I need to put like all the expenses and everything tied to this in one place, right? That's valuable, right? But the reality is that even if that's valuable, an operator like a marketing ops person or a sales ops person really, really doesn't want to think about data complexity. They don't want to think about like, hey, cool, when I've got 4 systems and they're all trying to write to the same customer, which one should win? And
Right.
sometimes this one wins in totality, and sometimes this one single field wins, and sometimes these 2 fields have to be combined, right? And that's not fun to go through a process of doing, right? And that's why a lot of people avoid doing it. And I think what we found is a lot of operators, even though the functionality was needed, a lot of operators didn't want to do it. They just didn't want to.
It's too hard basket.
It's just something they didn't want to deal with. And IT does. IT has to deal with it already. They're doing it already. And this is an easier way for them to do it. So instead of going and saying, hey, marketing ops, sales ops, blah, blah, you can go self-serve now, and you're going to be really effective at that. What we found instead is going to data and saying, hey, cool, this will let you go work with that team over in business because you can give them some tools, but we know that they're not going to do that much with them. So this is going to make you much faster and give you a collaboration angle with those teams. And we found that much more effective than going to the other teams being like, well, you can skill up and do data. They're like, we don't want it.
Knowing what you know now, what would you go back and change in the approach on the early days?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would.
Good to have a crystal ball, I know, but
yeah, I think I do more testing. I think I just do more flat out testing of different messaging. I think I do more testing of different groups. I'd also do different pricing testing, I think, and kind of like, I think like now I know what we can price at all this stuff, but if I didn't, right, and I could just give myself a set of advice, it would be do more testing, try more personas, think about different talk tracks that are beyond like stuff that you guys are doing day to day, and really drive at value instead of any individual of these so-called problems that you want to solve, like data quality or integration or whatever, because they're not really
right.
valuable.
It's interesting. Like you said, more price testing. A lot of CEOs, a lot of founders, a lot of marketing and partnerships and GTMs are afraid to test pricing. Why do you think that is, and do you think that could be holding them back?
I think it's the value fear, right? It's like that idea of like, okay, cool. Am I diminishing my value, right? I think yes, but also I think there's this it's this idea that everybody's like planning for scale, right? And it's like you can't get to scale unless you actually
have yeah
some success. And those early
right
customers that get the best of you on pricing, that's okay, because guess
right
what? They're probably going to stick around, and if they don't, cool. You no longer have that risk on your books, so it doesn't matter. But they helped you get somewhere. They got you some revenue. They got you some new probably features and functions that you wouldn't have built otherwise. All that stuff, right? So really, you have to look at those early stage customers as like rungs on a ladder, right? They're going to help you get to the next place. They're going to like be like, oh, I actually need this, and they're going to draw your platform in the right direction. So you have to be careful about which people you're letting do that. But I think testing pricing and being afraid that you might take a loss on one or two customers or break even or not make much money, I think that's okay. I think that is okay, and you have to take that in stride, as long as it's actually moving your business forward, right? I think much worse is to land a bunch of customers that are paying you and you're making money off of, but you're stagnant and your competitors are growing and they're expanding and they're getting new features and functions, and you're just hanging out and you're providing value, but eventually you will get overtaken.
Yeah, for sure. And would you suggest this is for early stage startups, obviously. Once you're a bit more established, at what I guess in your first startup, at what period would you suggest to stop experimenting with pricing and perhaps focus on something else? Lock it in.
I mean, and it's hard to say. I mean, and I guess
it depends on the business, right?
Yeah, and it depends on like how we're looking too. Is it like employee count? Are we talking revenue number? Are we talking like number of customers? Right? Who knows? I'd say something. Yeah, like 35 million, 50 million range. Like you probably have a good sense of pricing and how people are using like ARR. Right? You should have a good sense of how people are using your product, what metrics make sense, and which metrics are really harmful. Right? When you actually make the cost. Right? And so like at Workato, I mean, we famously would go through like I think almost a price shift like every 3 quarters at one point, right? Almost like it just like our customers would come to it again, right? But eventually we got to a point where we're like, okay, cool. This one metric, which was API calls for us, is we try to do connectors and we try to do number of customers and we try to do like different connectors, enterprise connectors versus SME connectors and like all this weird stuff, right? And what we found is like every single one of those we did was inherently stopping people from using our platform in one way or another. What wasn't is like something that directly equated to value, which is like how many times you run this thing, how much value you're getting out of it, costs you money. Cool, right? That equates to value, right? As long as the value equates to what they're actually getting as the output.
Of course, yeah. Two-part question. How did you figure out that was what was holding them back? And then you mentioned metrics. Let's touch on what metrics you think are the most important for GTM strategies.
Yeah. So I think how we figured that out was, I think regularly we had people not wanting to do new use cases because it would mean a new connector for them, right? And it's funny because building a new workflow would also mean more usage for them, but that doesn't equate the same way. It's not like you get charged as soon as you build the workflow, right? Connect to something, you have an active connector. You get billed instantly. You're not getting value yet. How long does it take to get value? Who knows? Right? If you're building in the meantime and you're not turning it on until it's ready and it turns on and it goes, but you're actually deriving value from that moment, that's pretty easy to say, hey, you got value. Right? So the equation becomes a lot more simple there. And I think that's what drove that. And I think, what was the second part of your question?
It can be really quick, just the main metrics that you're looking at this year and moving into 25.
I think as close as you can get to usage is the metric. And, I think seats are going away. Seats will inevitably, anybody that's still charging seats is going to be in a bad place,
right,
over the next couple of years, because APIs are going to continue to draw seats out of platforms, right? I think things like connectors or number of dashboards, workspaces, things like that, really hard to quantify and also really limit growth potentially. I think as much as you can get to individual inputs to outputs, like deriving where they derive value. And, for us, Synchry, that's like the number of records, right? At Workato, that was the number of workflows they ran, right? And, Salesforce and those guys are going to have a heck of a time, right? Because I think that they're not going to be able to break away from those seat models, and the agent models may get them to where they want to go. But yeah, first foray in that.
That sounds kind of exciting, right? Like, well, not so much for them, but for us little guys, it's exciting to see what will emerge from that. How are you guys positioning yourselves to capitalize on that, or how can someone?
Yeah, I'd say like how someone can. So I think there's like a lot of pieces of that. One is I think there's going to be, I think we're on the cusp of a pretty large shakeup in terms of enterprise software. That we're already seeing it, right? We're even seeing some very large companies invest in early stage startups for big things like CRM sometimes now, and that's pretty crazy. I think we're going to see a world of much more self-configured, owned platforms that are really malleable, or they're kind of almost, they're not homegrown, right? Like it's not back to the ages of everybody writing their own Python codes and just building their own platforms to do CRM, things like that. But we are looking at things like extensible architecture, right? We look at things like Atto, right? I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but it's up and coming CRM, right? A lot of early stage companies use it, including like OpenAI and those kind of companies, right? Hyper malleable.
Which one was that again? The mic cut out.
Atto, A-T-T-I.
Yeah.
And really it's a framework, right? There's almost nothing built into the platform. You plug and play everything you want to do, right? DevRev is another one, right? There's a lot of those out there that are starting to be like more of a, hey, we're agnostic and we're a UI. And we've got data architecture behind it. You plug into the data architecture, you can build whatever you want to, right? And making it make sense for your business instead of it's a Salesforce and like, yeah, it could kind of be for you, but it's still Salesforce.
Fair. Yeah. When do you think we're a couple of years away from that, or do you think it'll just exponentially hockey stick growth and just hit us like a ton of bricks, like we didn't even see it coming?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's now. I think it's right now, right? I think we see agentic coming out from Salesforce, and I don't think it's a real solution yet, in my opinion. I don't think it's actually valuable yet, but I think that they are smart by releasing something because the more people that get using it and testing it, the more it becomes real.
Yeah.
I think in the next year to 2 years, we'll see that actually deriving real value for clients. Same on the HubSpot side with all the new AI stuff they've implemented. But in the meantime, I think there's a ton of room. So I didn't completely answer your last question. I think there's a ton of room for early stage startups to take advantage of these things, right? We've got a bunch of generic platforms offering a bunch of generic use cases for a bunch of generic bots that don't actually provide anything besides a very generic high level value, right? And most of these things that you see demos for, once you dive in below the surface, they're not actually. Yeah. I mean, they show all this cool stuff, but then you want to do something granular, and it's just,
There's a lot of banking platforms out there that actually do that right now. They just live off the back of payment processors and Stripes and just fancy UI. And
it's amazing how many of these software are strung together OEM solutions, right? I think the ability for startups to do that themselves, like look at Clay, right? That's like a very basic outbound methodology in GBAT. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, on a much more interesting level, right? I mean, even something like Synchry, right? Like we are a highly configurable data architecture. Like you can use us to build all kinds of things. So one, can we reduce our costs of doing business by building better architecture ourselves that is much more fit for our business, that serves better, that is maintenance, that X, Y. Cool. That's one, right? And then two is, okay, cool. Can I see the gaps? Can I do one of these things really, really well that these big guys can't do yet? Or can I get economies of scale out of that by doing that really well? And that's okay. Am I going for acquisition or am I going for a big company? I think a lot of the AI companies right now should be going for acquisition, right? And white label. And they should be niching down on like something that they do really, really well and capturing as much data around it as they can and iterating and being really, really good because they are right in place to get either marketplace for, GCP, HubSpot, Salesforce, whatever, or get snapped up by one of those companies. And those companies are snapping people left and right now because they want to be able to just plug in an AI functionality for customer service, for instance, right? Which is obviously broad, but that's what they're hoping for.
Yeah. Do you think there's a lot of misconception about what AI is and what we can use AI for in business at the moment? Because it's such a buzzword. I feel like everyone this is what we do, is tack on AI and we'll get seed, we'll get an act required, and
yeah, I think it's a huge, in my opinion, it's a bit of a bubble, and it's good timing, right? We Apple released a study this morning talking about retesting most of the LLM models out there, and they basically took a lot of the tests that they've been doing around like these word problems and things that they've been showing. Oh, look at their reasoning advancing so fast, right? And they just realized that they've been asking them the same word problems every time. So the models have learned, oh, that's the same word problem I saw in the last model, and they know how to answer it. And so they tested them now with new word problems, slightly shifting the numbers, changing the potatoes to carrots, right? How many potatoes, right? And they're like performing like 30-40% worse than they were in like the test.
Oh, nice.
So GPT like just performed 30% worse than it like they actually said it performs, right, for reasoning. And so Apple's kind of take from that is, hey, we actually are already hitting a wall for LLMs and this current development of them, and they are never going to be able to reason. Period. In this type of LLM, they will not. Right? No matter what OpenAI says, Apple says it will never happen with this current type of development. Wow. And so to me, that means great. We know that AI is really, really good. I also don't have to worry about HAL coming for my life in the next 5 years, right? Which is great. But I think like the really cool thing there is to say, okay, cool. Then AI, now we can really look at AI as a tool set. We can look at it as a tool. It's not a panacea. It is not a panacea. But what it is, it's really good at all these things, fringe cases. Like fringe cases, humans normally need to look at because they are non-standard. But if I can use an LLM to standardize things that are not standard because, oh, really, it's actually like this other thing and no human needs to look at it, then that's great, right? But there's still going to be a lot of things that like are outside the LLM's ability. So I think fringe cases, yeah, AIs are going to be great at those things as a frontline like panacea to do any one function. Not for a while, I don't think.
Right. And what's the most exciting thing you're seeing from the space on your end? And you can also tell us the most exciting thing that you're doing. By the way, I'd like to talk more about Synchry.
Yeah, I mean the most exciting thing, I of course think it is something we're doing, but I think it's this idea of combining. I think within this reasoning model thing, like we know that agentic is still going to be valuable, right? And it's like, okay, cool. Like if we can't have a large reasoning model that's able to do everything and just figure it all out, then we need to have really good AIs that are really narrow, right? So to do that, we have to have really good data sets, we have to have really good training, we have to have really good focus. But within that, like we can start doing these things like swarms. Can we do an AI that really, really knows how to go through this one particular form and do this one thing, and then like call the next one that knows how to do this next piece of that, call the next one, and that can get really, really interesting. And so that's one of the things that I'm really excited about with Synchry is because we have this backing data model, this ability to connect to every system. And in the AI model, right now we can actually feed any AI model data sets, have them consume them, read them, do stuff with them, etc. So that thing I was talking about earlier with like outbound motion, and I'm building that in Synchry, right? I'm building the ability to use Phantom Buster to scrape like you do with Clay, right? I'm calling in LLMs that I built pre-prompts for. I'm calling in Synchry's data set for Salesforce and Ample Market and all that stuff to enrich all these data sets. And then I'm putting, okay, cool, based on the latest news and the cognitive intent and the Ample Market intent and everything else I have, now I've built a for each company that I'm going to go prospect into, and I can prospect them with intelligence every single time.
Brilliant. And is there anything else that needs to happen for that to be robust, or that's ready to go?
I think that like those things are always going to be built per company and per solution set, right? And so like unlike a lot of things where it's like I can just click go, like we're thinking like lean data and things like that, like Zapier, right? We're talking about like a lot of these solutions, they need to be something where you think about architecture in a way that a lot of people don't want to, but if they're willing to, then I think they can do a lot of really interesting things. So I would say it's as ready as it can be, but you're gonna have to do some work to get it to where you want it to be for you and your business and your prospects and your messaging.
Right, you got to get it out there.
Yeah.
Educate, find good salespeople, get the product out there. What's your strategy for building a sales team, Nate? Like, what's the best way for startups to do that?
I think that's a hard question right now. I think
for sure.
So I think there's like multiple facets to that question. I think there's one is who are you selling to and what you're selling, and I think that really defines what kind of salespeople you can have, because there is a gamut of salespeople, right? And we've all dealt with, the really technical salesperson that knows too much and doesn't know how to sell, right? And then the person on the other side who's like the pure sales bro can sell ice and Eskimo, but no idea what these sell.
Nothing about the product.
Nothing, right? And I think like those guys can be great, by the way, right? Like the latter can be great. Like, put them at an outreach or a sales off where they're selling to salespeople all day, they crush it, right? Versus
Yep.
the highly technical people, sometimes those people do really well at like a Snowflake or like a Databricks or something where they have to like get really, really technical all day, right? And I'm definitely one of the more technical sellers, right? So I think you have to, just like your ICP, if you do not go out and build your ideal rep profile, you're going to have a bad time. You're going to hire all these kinds of reps, and you're not going to know who you're hiring, why you're hiring. You're not going to know why people are failing and why they're failing, right? Because you haven't gone out and built any kind of programmatic way to do this. And that's a huge mistake a lot of people make in the startup world, is like they look at all this list of programmatic and they put all these numbers on the board, and then they just hire willy-nilly, right? And like churn salespeople in and out. And like,
Right.
a lot of people don't realize, like I talk to startup founders all the time, and I'm like, you realize that like the average AE rollout like is I think it's 250 is the cost, the opportunity cost of a rep that fails within like 3 to 6 months. And that's like lost opportunities. That's how much you paid them. That's training. That's other people training.
Yep.
All that stuff, right? And so like if you're going through 3 or 4 reps a year, that's $1 million off your ARR every year. That's crazy. Right?
Yeah.
And I think that you have to be really intentional about both, okay, what you're going after, what your strategy is to go after them, how you're going to coach, so what the leader for that team looks like, how they interact, right? Because they're going to work with a certain kind of salespeople, and then you go out to hire your salespeople that align with those two things. And if you don't do that,
Right.
you're going to have consistent issues with your sales leader churning out, your sales team churning out, both churning out, right? And an unmanageable pipeline where it's going to go, because you don't have any predictability or programmatic way to manage it.
Right. But if you do that way, you can start building a high performing team, keep them on board. You're not using that $1 million. Yeah, that's crazy stat. I actually haven't heard that one.
Yeah.
Okay, Nate. Well,
that was actually 3 or 4 years ago. So.
Oh, was it? It's probably way more now. What's the do you have any goals for 2025 or what, or do you set your goals by quarterly, like Q1?
Yeah, I mean, I got goals all over the place. No, I mean, we've got our annual targets for sure, but I think my personal goal is I want two things. I want to build a product marketplace for AI on our platform if I can. So I would like to have people be able to come into our platform and be like, oh, here's something I can use for this one thing I want to do, and here's something I can use for this other thing, right? And it really just takes building the partnerships. So it's a lot of work, actually. And then the other piece would be that same process that I'm talking about. If I can get that fully automated in a way that it actually is, like right now I'm iterating, I'm still working on it, all that stuff. If I can get it where it's just coming along and doing the thing, like that will be phenomenal. I'm sure a bunch of my prospects will want to actually go to you too, which is cool. So yeah,
yeah, I'm super excited for that. Yeah, but like if you need a beta tester, hit me up for sure. Cool, Nate. Well, I really appreciate our conversation today. For everybody out there that wants to get in touch with you, that is interested in working with you, how can they best reach you?
Yeah, hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm pretty big on LinkedIn. Nate Roybal, or it's Nathan Roybal, I think, Roybal. Or you can find me, at Synchry, or Nate at Synchry.com.
Sweet. I'll put your LinkedIn in the link of the description of the video as well.
This was fun, man. I had a good time. This was a good conversation.
Right, so there you have it. That was my chat with Nate Roybal from Synchry. Very interesting chat. Hope you guys learned something with that. Feel free to reach out with him on LinkedIn if you're interested in learning more about what he's doing. And I learned a ton from him, and I look forward to staying in touch with him. And yeah, that will be all from this episode. I'll see you on the next one.